Could you imagine meeting somebody that not only had all of the knowledge that you had stored inside of your Airtable database, but also fully comprehended it inside and out and was able to answer any question you had regarding any of the information stored inside of your Airtable database? Well, that reality is here, and even now us no-coders can build an AI custom chatbot that will let you actually have a conversation with all of that useful data that you've stored inside of your Airtable database. So I think you're going to get a lot out of this one. Even if you don't really use Airtable, this exact method can be used with anything. The PDF document that has hundreds if not thousands of pages, it can be used with a Google Sheets document, it can be used with Notion, anything where there's a huge amount of data where it's not actually feasible to put that in as a single prompt into something like ChatGPT. We're going to use a no-code tool called Flowise, which is an AI chatbot builder. It's completely free of charge, and if you missed my last video, you might want to check that out now and then return to this video. In that last video, we show you exactly how to install this piece of software, which is free to use, and we also show you toward the end of that video how to deploy your actual chatbot apps that are built with this software so that you can use them inside of your websites or inside of your web apps or inside of your other no-code projects. We're going to get right into it. You want to open up your Flowise AI dashboard, and what we're going to do is come into marketplaces here, and inside of marketplaces there are lots of different templates for us to choose from, and today's tutorial is going to be based around this template here, the conversational retrieval QA chain. So if you click into that and just simply click use template, it will create a copy of it for you to start configuring. So the configuration for this will be relatively quick. We'll need to get our OpenAI API key, which I'll show you where to get shortly. We'll need to change this entire module here. It's currently set up to be a text file that we'd be uploading so that we could chat with a text file, but in this instance we're going to use a different module so that we're able to chat with our Airtable database. And then we'll come down to this part of the flow here, which is using what's called a vector database named Pinecone. So if we start with the chat OpenAI module, the first thing we'll need to do is go and grab our OpenAI API key. Come into your OpenAI, you'll need to log in, go into the API, and what you're looking for is view API keys here, and then create new secret key, and we'll call this one Flowise7 Airtable. Create secret key, and then you want to take a copy of that secret key and come back into your Flowise dashboard, secret key in there, and there's one down here as well, which is OpenAI embeddings module, which again I'll talk about in more detail in the next few steps. All we need for the time being is to put the OpenAI API key into both of those modules, so they're now fully configured. The next step is to come and actually delete this text file module, because we don't want to chat with a text file, we want to chat with our Airtable database. So if you come over here, and what you're looking for is in the document loaders modules, you'll see there's one here called Airtable load data from an Airtable table. So if we drop that into the workflow, and it's going to take the place of the text document, and you'll see here this document anchor point, we need to link that down to here to the Pinecone upsert document module, and then also we'll need to link it to this text splitter. And again, we'll talk about what a text splitter is now in just a second. So we need to now configure our Airtable module, and what it needs is the personal access token, a base ID and a table ID. So we'll jump on over into Airtable now. Where you'll find your personal access token is by coming over here to your account, and you're looking for Developer Hub. So if you come into Developer Hub here, you'll be able to create a personal access token. You click this blue button here, create new token. It will ask you to name the token. It will ask you what scopes. In this case, I've just allowed data.records read scope. You can allow as many scopes as you want, but this is at a minimum what will be required to do this workflow that we're building today. And then at the end of that, it will say which bases do you want to give access to, and you can choose as many bases as you want, or you can give your entire workspace. I've selected one base for the purposes of this tutorial. And then when you click create new token, it will actually display the token for you, and it's a really long string, and you just make sure you take a copy of that and come back into your Flowise app. Okay, so we'll paste our personal access token into the personal access token field here. Next thing we need to do is go back into Airtable and get the base ID. Where you're going to get your base ID is, it's always at the top in the URL, and it's going to be the code that begins with the three letters APP. And so we just want to take that code up until before this / and make sure you copy that, come back into Flowise, and we want to drop that into the base ID field, come back into Airtable. The table ID will be right next to the base ID, and the table ID is the table that you have all of your information in that you would like to be able to interact and chat with. Back into Flowise, and we'll drop it in here into table ID. So that's the Airtable module now is fully configured. We'll now move on to this Pinecone module down here. Pinecone is a vector database. A vector database enables you to use a artificial intelligence embedding model to store data in a way that is meaningful to artificial intelligence. It is a way to store embeddings, which is a numerical representation of the meaning of that piece of information that's being stored in the vector database. This module in this flow, what it is doing is it's converting all of the data from our Airtable table into bite-sized chunks or embeddings, and it is loading those in a computer or artificial intelligence readable fashion inside of this Pinecone database. When your chatbot is built here, every prompt that the user puts into the chatbot, that prompt itself is also going to be embedded or turned into an artificial intelligence legible meaning, and it's going to be then sent into the Pinecone database and searched against all of the thousands of different vectors that will be in there, which represents your data from your Airtable base. And it's not searching based on the keywords in your prompt, it's actually searching based on meaning. So it's taking the meaning of your prompt and it's looking for the most closely related data inside of the vector database in terms of meaning. And that's why it's so powerful, because it will only bring back the relevant bits of the data from the myriads of information that are inside of your Airtable table to bring into the chat flow context, so that the OpenAI conversation can review the context that it has drawn from your database and use that as part of its consideration in determining the response to make to you. We don't really need to know the technical inner workings of it, and I'll show you exactly how to configure these modules now to get this workflow to work. So come over to pinecone.io and sign up for a free account. Everything we're building here today can be done on the free version of Pinecone. When you're set up and logged in, you just come here and create an index, give it a name. I'll call it Airtable Chatbot, and configure index. The figure that goes here is always the number 1536, and the reason for that is because the OpenAI LLM uses 1536 dimensions. You won't need to change anything else in here, and you just come down to the bottom and hit create index. Now that you have your index set up, you've got all the information that you need to complete the population of the module inside of Flowise. The first thing we'll need to take is just the name of your index, and if you come over here and drop that into Pinecone index, you'll also need the region or the environment, which is this code here, and it's got a little copy icon there. So copy that, come back into Flowise and paste it in there. The last thing we need is the Pinecone API key, and if you come into Pinecone, it has a section here called API keys, and you can just copy your API key from here, come back into Flowise and paste it into the Pinecone API key module. That completes the configuration of the Pinecone Upsert document module, and the last thing we look at is the text splitter module. So this is the text splitter module. It's connected to our Airtable module, and this is the part that is breaking up the Airtable data into different chunk sizes before it hits the OpenAI embeddings part to be loaded into the Pinecone vector database. And there's no exact science to this, it's more of an art, I think. I might be wrong on that, but I tend to change this and experiment with it. And the chunk size is literally the number of characters that's going to be in each string. So when Airtable spits out all of the data relating to that table, this chunk size is then going to take all of the data and break it down into sizes of 1,000. I normally drop it to 500. So what the chunk overlap does is it allows a certain number of characters at the end and at the beginning of each chunk to overlap with the chunk before it and after it, so that it can link chunks together and bring in relevant chunks when OpenAI is looking for the most relevant chunks, essentially. To get this to work, I would recommend just setting it at 550 as a starting value. Some people will go for much lower chunk size so that almost every sentence is a chunk, but I feel for the type of use case that I have here, whereby it's a tax legislation database, I usually find larger chunk size are necessary in order to get good responses from the chat model, because the actual phrase might be buried within a more explanatory paragraph, and so that's why I generally look to have a slightly larger chunk size. But there's no more hard and fast way to do it other than experimentation and seeing what works best for your use case. So that's everything set up now inside of the workflow, and what we have to do is hit save, and we'll give it whatever name you like. I'll call this Airtable Chatbot and click save. The first time we actually chat with this chatbot that we've just built, it's going to trigger the entire flow whereby it is now breaking down all of the Airtable data into chunks. It is then creating embeddings for each of the chunks, and it is then storing each of those embeddings as a vector inside of the vector database. It currently has 0 vectors when we come in to look at the index inside of Pinecone here, and after we trigger this flow, we expect to see this to start building up as the vectors are being stored. This will only have to happen on the first run of the model, and from that point on, it's now just a conversational chat back and forth where every time you put a prompt in, the chatbot is going back into Pinecone looking for the most relevant information to feed back into OpenAI so that OpenAI can consider it and give you a pretty good educated response. So to kick off the flow, we'll just simply say hello. So we can see within a couple of minutes the vectors start loading in. You can see it's gone up to 6750 and it's counting up by the second here at the moment. So while the vector database is filling up, we will build the final part of this project. So if we come back into Flowise and we need to go add new, and we'll build this chat flow from scratch. So why we're building a new chat flow is because we want to create a chat flow that is actually now just going to converse with that vector database that we've just set up from the previous flow. And it's going to be in this chat flow that we will actually spend our time chatting with the Airtable data. The other flow was set up really to get the Airtable data into the vector database. So this flow should really only be 4 modules. If you click here on the left hand side, and we'll come down to a chat model, and we're going to find the chat OpenAI module. We'll drop that onto the canvas, zoom out a little bit. We'll also need then a chain, and the chain we're going to need is a conversational retrieval QA chain, and I'll drop that in there. So it's looking for our language model, and I'll connect that up to our OpenAI module here. And then if I come back in, we'll need to now find our vector database, and if we scroll down to vector stores, and we're going to be looking for Pinecone, which is load existing index. And if we drop that there, and we want to connect this anchor point up to the vector store retriever on our conversational retrieval QA chain. And the last thing we need to find is the OpenAI embeddings module. So if we come down here to embeddings, and if we find the OpenAI embeddings module, so I'm going to configure all of these exactly as we have done in the previous flow in terms of putting in API keys and putting in environment names and that, and I'll be back in just a second. So the vector database has stopped. It means all of the vectors have been loaded. It's showing that it's 20% full, and in total there's just under 17,000 vectors, so there's really quite a huge amount of data here. Coming back into Flowise, this is the chat flow that we've just set up so that we can now chat with the vectors inside of the database, and I've filled in the API keys into the various modules here, exact same configuration as you saw earlier in the video. And now we are ready to click save on this particular chatbot, and we'll just say Airtable Chatbot, and I'll just say conversation on this one because this is where we're having the conversation. So the final thing to set this up is you have to actually come in here into additional parameters and make sure that you fill in the namespace here. Where you get that is from your Pinecone index. If you come down to the very bottom of the index page, you'll find the namespace that those vectors are loaded into, and this one's defaulted to my namespace as the name. So you just copy that, whatever name you have there, and come back into Flowise and make sure you paste it exactly as it is there. Top K means how many results, how many vectors to return in terms of the most relevant vectors. I've just put in 3, and again it's for a first test run to see how it works. And if we close out of that, I've also turned this on here, and if we hit save, I'd always click save after any edits you make inside the canvas because otherwise it won't be reflected in your chat. And now we'll just ask it a generic tax question as our first experiment to see is our entire conversation with our Airtable database working. So if I want to claim a tax refund from 12 years ago, what can I do? Question mark. And here we go, it's the moment of truth. So it's stating here, based on the given context, if you want to claim a tax refund from 12 years ago, it is unlikely you'll be able to do so. The context mentions a statutory limit of 4 years for making a claim for a refund. Therefore, if the taxable period to which your refund relates is more than 4 years ago, the claim for a refund would be denied. I know that that's definitely really accurate. And you can see here, it's giving you the snippets in terms of the most relevant vectors that have been pulled from the database, and you can actually click on those and you can see what information is actually being passed by your vector database into ChatGPT or into OpenAI in order to facilitate the response that it's giving to you. So it's obviously got, this is one of the chunks that was created earlier in our earlier flow, and then it also has this other metadata, and it is showing you, it actually has the record ID inside of the metadata, has the URL for the actual record that this piece of data has come from. So that's also really interesting, because it could mean that we could potentially ask it about what record, or we could use this almost as a search feature in terms of trying to identify records based on meaning search rather than on keyword search. The next step from here will be now to deploy this chatbot into your web app or onto your website so that you can open up to others. In this use case, it was a tax legislation trained chatbot, and so you could have this as a member's web app whereby accountants and other types of individuals would pay maybe a membership fee to come in and have access to a professionally trained AI tax legislation expert. Anyway, if you're looking to do the deployment part, I'd recommend you check out this video here. It's the previous video in this series, and toward the end of that video I show you exactly step by step how to deploy the actual chatbots that we've built here into your no-code and web apps. Anyway, that brings us to the end of today's tutorial. I hope you got something out of it, and if you did, I'd really appreciate if you click that like button. It really helps get my videos out there. I'm really enjoying making all of this content. It's kind of at a really good time when both no-code and artificial intelligence are growing rapidly and changing from week to week, and so I hope you're enjoying it. If there's anything you'd like to see in future videos, please let me know about it in the comments below, and if you have any questions on today's workflow, please leave some questions in the comments below and I'll be happy to help out. Okay, thanks guys, talk to you next time.